All right, so our next speaker, who's waiting patiently, is Reem Tariq from the National Environmental Health Association, and I believe you recorded your bio, and so I will just get out of the way.
Hello, everyone. My name is Reem Tariq. I am a senior project coordinator at the National Environmental Health Association. At NEHA, I manage projects that focus on federally unregulated drinking water, climate and health, and emergency preparedness. Prior to NEHA, I worked as an environmental health specialist trainee at Division of Environmental Health, Benton County Health Services. At Benton County, I played an active role in communicable disease outbreak, rabies investigations, maintenance, and monitoring of public water system surveys, and public health preparedness planning. I received my Master of Science in Environmental Health from East Tennessee State University. Presenting with me today is Megan Sensman. Megan is an environmental data coordinator at Virginia Department of Health's Office of Environmental Health Services within the Division of Data Management and Process Improvement. We want to thank you for providing us an opportunity to share our work with you today, and we will be presenting on building capacity through data-driven measures for safe private wells. Before we get into the presentation, though, I briefly want to talk about NEHA. At NEHA, our mission is to advance the environmental health professional for the purpose of providing a healthful environment for all. We have about 6,500 members, and our commitment is to provide the highest quality of training, courses, tools, and resources to empower professionals to become trusted leaders and experts in the profession. Just a quick overview of our presentation today. I will be providing some background and introduction for you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Megan to talk about some partnerships and the online GIS platform that we will be sharing with you. And I will finish it up with providing some supportive initiatives as well as some future directions. And with that, let's get into our presentation. In 2020, NEHA embarked on a partnership with the Virginia Department of Health for a CDC-funded environmental health capacity grant. We applied for multiple components within the grant. The overall purpose of the project was to reduce the burden of water-related adverse health outcomes in the Three Rivers Health District in Virginia through strategies that identify environmental health hazards, promote data-driven decision-making, and build capacity of local health departments in areas with private wells and community water systems. Strategies included developing a pilot program and implementing evidence-based environmental health practices to provide interventions related to private wells and community water systems that aim at assisting and educating communities living in disaster-prone jurisdictions. We also wanted to create a visual database of private wells along with their risks and pollutants and provide education, training, and resources to build local environmental health competencies and capacity for addressing safe water. For the purpose of this presentation, Megan and I will focus on one of the specific components and particularly highlight our approach to developing an online GIS platform or the visual database for private wells along with the hazards. VDH, that is Virginia Department of Health, in collaboration with NEHA, executed this approach by expanding and strengthening data use in informatics to highlight the importance of environmental health workforce and data to promote resiliency in high-risk communities. I've laid out the framework for this activity within the grant on the slide here. In order to create an online GIS mapping tool, we use data from VDH's statewide environmental health database, that's EHD. Information on wells and on-site wastewater, along with the floodplain data from Federal Emergency Management Agency, that's FEMA, and data from resource protected area as well as resource management areas, in hopes that this tool would be used by local environmental health program planning and impacted communities to identify hazards and help strengthen resiliency planning for the region. We felt this was important since severe weather events such as hurricanes can cause flooding and impact infrastructure, highlighting the need for increased databases for hazards surrounding safe water sources. Furthermore, we focused on expanding academic and organizational partnerships and incorporating data on historical storm events and flooding to help augment the data provided by FEMA floodplain maps to allow for the Three Rivers Health District to better plan for future extreme weather events and disasters, as well as mitigating environmental health strategy hazards to prevent negative health effects and help build capacity for local jurisdictions and at-risk communities. We were hoping that this would allow staff in the Three Rivers Health District to make data-driven decisions using various data overlays that link hazards with health risks among the at-risk communities following hurricanes and flooding disasters. This tool eventually will be open to partners as well, as shown in the slide here. And with that, I will let Megan describe the development and the scope of the online GIS platform.
This GIS tool we've been developing to map water wells along with potential environmental hazards and climate change hazards along the Chesapeake Bay in Virginia. So to start with a little bit of an introduction, there are over 13 million homes in the US that rely on private wells for their drinking water, but many of these wells are failing or they're in disrepair or just aging, just having all sorts of issues. In Virginia, there were 965 replacement well permits requested in 2020 alone. And then along with all these issues, these older systems, we also have environmental hazards that can impact well water quality, and then also climate change hazards like sea level rise that is expected to cause additional well failures in low-lying coastal areas in Virginia. And so our goal here was to create a GIS mapping tool that combines 4 different kinds of data. So we have spatial locations of the private and community wells, of course. Then we have environmental health hazards, things that can impact the water quality, climate change hazards, things that can impact the functionality of the well. And then finally, we also just have some reference data just for doing analysis purposes. And so with this project, we started with 4 counties, this sort of a pilot project. And those 4 counties I have highlighted in blue on the map there. So that is Lancaster, Matthews, Middlesex, and Northumberland. And so like Chris said, all of this is part of a grant that we received from the CDC and that we've been working on in partnership with NEHA. And this is just a couple components of that grant. It's a pretty large grant, again, focusing a lot on data. You know, there's this aspect to it, mapping all this data together. There's also some data collection and data integrity, data quality components to it. So this is just one part of this this grant, but thank you to the CDC for the funding. And so getting into the methodology, so how did we create this map? Essentially, most of it was just finding what GIS layers were publicly available. So looking on websites for trusted sources of high quality GIS data, and then that was available for download, and then combining them all together onto one map to make comparisons, get that visual association. So a lot of it was just going out and searching for data, seeing what we can and can't use, what we want to use, and combining it all together. And so with that, we had a lot of different data sources. So I'm going to break these down by, again, those 4 different kinds of data that we have here. So for the well locations, we had 3 different data sources. We had ourselves, VDH. We also received data from some local county governments, and we also received data from the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, or VIMS. For environmental health hazards, which is anything that has a potential impact on water quality, nearly all of those came from the Department of Environmental Quality, or DEQ. For our climate change hazard data, we had 2 different sources: the Department of Emergency Management, or VDEM, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. And then finally, for our reference data, there was two sources there. There was the U.S. Geological Service and the Virginia Geographic Information Network. And I'm going to jump over into ArcGIS in a minute to show you all the layers, but I do want to explain our well locations for a little bit, because this was probably the most involved layer, because we had to combine several sources together. So first, we have two different kinds of well locations here. We have community wells and private wells. And so community wells are anything that supplies water to 25 or more people with more than 14 service connections for homes and businesses, as compared to a private well, it's only going to serve, a handful of homes or one home, to differentiate those two. But our community well data, that all came from one source. It came from the Office of Drinking Water at VDH. So they provided that data to us. But then for our private wells, there was a little bit more of an involved process there. So most of the data came from, again, ourselves, the Office of Environmental Health Services, which is our office, the office that I'm in. We manage a database of all of the well permits for the entire state. And so that was the main source of our data, but then we also supplemented that with some additional sources. First and foremost being the addresses from real estate assessments. So what that means is we would contact local county governments and ask for, when they do a real estate assessment, sometimes they would note on a property if that property has a private well or has a public water connection. And so with that information, we can identify addresses that have wells. And then finally, the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, they've been mapping a lot of wells in this area, and they have their own technique for it, and they've provided data to us as well. And so with all of these three sources, combine them all together into one data set to get just one map of all of the private wells in this area. So that, if there's one well in multiple sources, they're all combined into one. Okay, so with that, I'm going to move over to GIS so we can take a kind of closer look at everything. If there are issues with this, please let me know. Sometimes GIS gets a little wonky when we're sharing screen, but you can see over here on the left under contents, I have the 4 different data sources here. So we have the wells, environmental health hazards, climate change hazards, and our reference data. And then on our map view, I have our 4 counties just outlined here so we can see them easily. And then I'm just going to go through all of our layers here, just show you what they look like and give a little bit of background information. So starting with those wells that I just went over, we have 2 different layers. So first we have the community wells that are in this yellow color here. So you can see all the community wells in these areas. Then next we have the private wells, obviously a lot more private wells in this area, but I have them all marked here in blue. And so again, I went over our data sources there. So ODW provided the community well data, and then the private well data all came from 3 different sources. So moving on to our environmental hazards. So again, most of this data came from DEQ. And so we have 6 here, and I'm just going to go through them one by one. So first, we have the Virginia Pollutant Discharge Elimination Systems, or VPDES outfalls. So these are locations where pollutants are being discharged. They're permitted to do it. And there's 9 different kinds of permits for these, but it includes things like non-metallic mineral mining and domestic sewage discharge. So we just had 3 of them on the map here. Next, we have alternate water supplies. This is these purple dots here. So these are locations where there is a carbon filtration unit installed on a drinking water system, because there's some sort of like pollutant in the area, like a leaking petroleum tank that is impacting the water. So these aren't signs that there's an issue, or these aren't causing water quality issues in the area, but there are signs that there is an issue with the water quality in that area. So that's why these are included on the map. Next, we have registered petroleum tanks, which are these points in red. So this includes all above ground and underground storage tanks for petroleum. And those underground storage tanks particularly can have an issue and impact water quality for a well, especially if they're leaking. So that's a pretty important data point to include. Next, we have the PREP reports. These are pollution response program report locations. So anytime there's a report of any air, water, or waste pollution incident, they get recorded here. And so any past or present release of pollutants in these areas could be impacting water quality nearby. Next, we have biosolid areas. So these are polygon shapes in purple here, you can see. So these are areas where there is a field and they are applying biosolid waste onto that field. And so any runoff or leaching from those fields can impact the water quality for wells nearby. And then finally, we have solid waste facilities. These are also polygons, but they're kind of smaller. So I'll zoom in a little bit. You can see some in orange here. So these are permitted facilities that store, treat, or dispose of solid waste. And so again, any leachate from these could be impacting water quality nearby. And then finally, we did want to include another couple of layers here for environmental hazards. So we wanted to include both national priority list sites, or NPL sites. Those are federal facilities that are marked as Superfund sites, if you've heard that term before. And then along with that, also non-NPL federal facilities. So we found data for these, but there isn't any of these facilities in these 4 counties. So they're not included here, but if we were looking at a statewide map, then they could be included, but just so keep in mind, something we wanted to include, but just isn't on this map just because there weren't any in these 4 counties. Okay, so that is all of our environmental hazards. So moving on to the climate change hazards. So these are things that can impact the functionality of the well itself. So first, we're going to start with some data from FEDM. So this is hurricane evacuation routes and hurricane zones. So the hurricane evacuation routes are these red lines here. And then the zones are the polygon shapes. So these are zones that go from A to D. It's part of their Know Your Zone program. And the colors are just colored red to yellow. It doesn't signify severity or anything. It's just how I've colored them. But with these zones, we wanted to highlight these, and because they're areas that are impacted by hurricanes. They experience a lot of extreme weather regularly, and that can result in flooding and issues for the well and that functionality. So, and that's why we've included that there. Next, we have data from NOAA. So again, these are climate change hazards. So first, we have flooding frequency. So these are areas that experience frequent flooding. And flooding sort of is something that's going to be a part of all of these different climate change hazards because they all can lead to flooding. But flooding can impact a well in 3 major ways. So first, it can contaminate the well water as that flood water comes in. It can bring pollutants with it and contaminate the water in a well. It can also cause erosion of that well as it brings sediment. It can erode down sensitive parts of the well and lead to a loss of function. And then finally, most importantly, flooding can lead to the complete loss of functionality of the well, or just the complete loss of the well. It could collapse or be destroyed by the flooding. So flooding is a pretty severe concern when we're talking about wells. So we definitely want to make sure that we have this flooding frequency layer. And then along with that, we also have sea level rise. So this one takes a little minute to load. But for sea level rise, we have 3 different layers here. So we have one for if there's only 1 foot of sea level rise, that's this yellow color. Then we have 2 feet and 3 feet. So I'm going to zoom a little, and we'll just start with 1 foot. So you can see this is all of the land that will be impacted by 1 foot of sea level rise. But then as I add 2 feet and 3 feet, you can see how they encroach further in and cover more land. So you can see the 2 feet of sea level rise. See 2 feet of sea level rise here in orange, encompassing more land, and then 3 feet, you can see encompasses even more land. So again, important to consider since that can lead to flooding and other concerns. So that's all of our climate change layers. Then finally, we have some reference data. So first it's just the county outlines, just for reference. And then next we have some USGS land cover data. There was originally 15 different categories here, but I've simplified it down to 4 just to make things a little easier. So first we just have, water, of course. Then this green color, that is any forested areas. Then we have the yellow color, that is agricultural land. And then finally red is any developed or impervious surfaces. And so again, this is just a reference layer just for doing analysis. So if we want to know what the land use or land cover looks like in an area, we have that layer. And then also our other reference layer is the BG and Virginia parcels. So these are just the property boundaries for all of the land in this area. And so again, just a reference layer, but this is a pretty important one. We use this a lot in our analysis for looking at how a whole property is impacted. So pretty important reference layer as well. And so with that, all of the layers that are on the map, I'm going to switch back over to the presentation, the PowerPoint presentation, to go over some discussion points. So starting with some limitations of the data. So with all of that data, all of those different sources, especially since a lot of these were downloading from online sources, some of it may be out of date. They haven't updated their website in a while, haven't updated the data. And then that can also lead to potential differences in different layers. If you have one that was updated this year versus one that hasn't been updated in 5 years, that could explain if there's any sort of discrepancy between those 2 layers, like if one's saying one thing and the other one isn't. So that can lead to some issues. Next, an important thing to note are private well locations. These are not precise locations of where the well is actually located on the ground. It's not the exact coordinates of the well. Rather, it's a location associated with the address. So we take the addresses that we have for each well and geocode them so that that point that we're showing you, that's just a location associated with the address. So it's not precise exact location of the well, but it'll get the job done. It's still an approximate location for that well that is associated with that address. And then finally, with all of this data, there's data quality issues, of course. So on this screenshot here, you can see the BPDES outfalls. If you noticed or not, but one of the outfalls is out here in the Chesapeake Bay, and it probably shouldn't be. So that could have been an issue with the projection. So with all of these different layers that all have different projections, it could be that when they all got combined into one got shifted over a little too far and ended up in the bay. Or this could have been an issue with the data itself, just as it was downloaded and what's available on the website. There's just the coordinates are wrong. But just with this much data, there's going to be some data quality issues. So our next steps for this data, we want to add even more data to this map. So first, we want to add some well water sample information. So looking at things like, how much arsenic's in the water, or testing for MCLs, things like that. We want to incorporate that in the map whenever possible. And so again, at VDH, the Office of Drinking Water, they have water sample information for their community wells that they've provided to us. So we want to incorporate that into the map. Next, like Chris had said, we want to include septic systems on this map. So right now it's just wells, but we want to also point out where all the septic systems are, since septic systems, especially if they're aging or leaking or failing can impact water quality of nearby wells. So we definitely want to include those on the map as well. And so it's a similar data source, data process for the septic systems that it was for the wells. Since again, we have access to the permitting data for septic systems, we know where a lot of these septic systems are. And then we'll also use that real estate assessment data to sort of fill in the gaps and identify additional septic systems. So that again, sort of like we did with the wells, just combining those two data sources together to get septic locations for this area. And then finally, we plan to expand this project to additional counties. So we have funding for expanding this to Westmoreland County. So that will be done as part of this grant. But then also we plan to expand this statewide. So it's a map of the entire state with continued funding as it's available, especially since a lot of these data sources that are publicly available online are available for the entire state. So there's not a lot of work that will need to be done to make this statewide for those layers at least. So finally, we have this map. What are we going to do with it? So we will be sharing this with our partners, sort of that what Chris had showed, that little flow chart there. So we're going to be sharing this with the local health departments and then also some additional partners so that they can use it for analysis. They can take a look at it and then they can make some decisions. They can, identify targets and target some wells that are near hazards. And so they can identify those vulnerable wells. They can educate communities and highlight the risks associated with these hazards and associated with having a well in these vulnerable areas. They can identify these vulnerable areas to provide funding for infrastructure improvement. And then finally, they can equip stakeholders and homeowners with knowledge of these hazards so they can better plan for future drinking water supplies that are safe and equitable. And that is the end of my presentation. So I have
All right. I just want to wrap up some quick notes here regarding the supporting initiatives. So NEHA and VDH are hosting an internship program that recruits students to enter legacy data on private wells and septics onto Virginia's environmental health database. So far, we've recruited 8 interns that have entered data on about 3,500 private well and septic records into the EH database. Also, we're hoping to use the online GIS platform to strengthen resiliency plans for hurricane and recurrent flooding from sea level rise within the Three Rivers Health District. We're currently working with a work group of subject matter experts who are revising the resiliency plans for safe private water and hope to incorporate the use of the online platform into the plans. And lastly, some future directions. In the near future, we will be working on adapting and disseminating some of the developed educational resources pertaining to the online tool on how EH data can be used to identify EH hazards and support data-driven decision-making. Also to promote the online GIS platform by creating an ongoing community outreach campaign that will inform the community of potential environmental contaminations from private wells and septic systems. And with that, we would be happy to take questions. Unfortunately, Megan will not be able to answer them virtually because she recently underwent a medical procedure. So I can take questions for her if I'm not able to respond and get back to you. Or you could directly reach out to Megan using the contact information that you have up on the screen. Thanks so much.
Great. So, Reem, we do have a question, and I actually have the same question because we do a lot of GIS work. And are those maps and the GIS coverages going to be made available? Yeah.
Yes, they will be made available. At this point, they're not publicly available. And part of it is the way that the grant is structured. We will be working on this material for quite some time. And we started out with the pilot program of just building out these maps. We want to then open it up to the EH staff within the Three Rivers Health District, and then finally open it up to the public and communities in the Three Rivers Health District. So partners will be able to view them. Anybody will be able to view them.
Great. Oh, really interesting stuff. It's great what they're doing. So, and how many counties are there? I know you're working in 2 right now, so there's probably a long way to go.
Yes, there are about 10 counties. And as part of the pilot program, we started off with wanting to build this out for 4 counties. Yep.
Great. Reem will be available if you have any other questions that come up. Yeah, into really great stuff. It's good to see states doing those sorts of things, to be honest. So.